I am very pleased to have Denise Herzing with us today. Denise and I have been working on a project together for about 4 years now. It's the first time we're actually doing a joint talk on it. And so you all are our test guinea pigs. We're going to see how well we do. This is stuff with the Wild Dolphin Project, which Denise founded over 30 years ago. She's been working with wild dolphins in the Bahamas for over 30 years. She's been compared to Jane Goodall in her work with what she's been doing with trying to live with the dolphins and understand their societies and how they communicate. Today we're going to have a talk where we're going to switch between the two of us slightly. She's going to give you a lot of the background of the dolphins, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the technical details. And afterwards we'll have some demos and allow people to come and play with the equipment if they want. And with that, Denise Herzing.
All right, can you all hear me?
Hi, Denise.
Yeah. Hi there. Well, thank you for coming. Thanks, Thad. And it's a real treat to be here to share our work. I've been working with Thad, as he said, for 3 to 4 years now, and it's nice to be presenting some of our results and exciting tools. So what we're going to do tonight is go through who the dolphins are that we work with in the Bahamas. We're going to talk a little bit about dolphin communication and some of the tools we're using. Now, this spring, National Geographic magazine came out with a 3-part series on dolphin intelligence. And this is because there's always great interest from the public about dolphins, but there's a confusion about what we know about dolphins, how smart they are, how they communicate. And there's a reason why scientists want to work with dolphins. And when we measure intelligence and complexity, we look at a lot of different things, including physical structures and cognitive abilities. And we know, for example, if we measure the brain-to-body ratio of dolphins, which is called EQ, or encephalization quotient, they rate just second to humans, even higher than the great apes. So they seem to have the physical abilities and complexity of a complex mammalian brain. We know that in captivity, at least, they can learn to comprehend artificial languages, both gestural and acoustic. We know in the wild, they use tools in Australia. On the upper right photo, you can see a picture of a dolphin pushing a piece of sponge along, and it's a little protection when they hunt poisonous fish. And we also know that dolphins show evidence of self-awareness through a mirror recognition tests. So there's a lot of reasons we're interested in dolphins. Now, we're going to talk about what we think is a unique collaboration. First, we're going to share some research and ideas around how we decode dolphin signals. And then we're going to talk about an underwater computer interface we've been developing to actually play artificial sounds and see if the dolphins will use that system in any two-way interchange. Now, we have a really unique collaboration, partly because our database is really unique because we work underwater. So we have underwater and video correlates for 30 years. And we have a lot of metadata like life history, who's related to who, and how they communicate in their own society. And secondly, of course, Georgia Tech has great computer science skills. A lot of pattern recognition work goes on here, algorithms, and of course, a prototyping lab to make our wearable computers. Now, first, I want to go through a little bit of how dolphins communicate with each other, because we want to look at that first, and we're going to talk about some of the techniques and tools we use to analyze those signals. But there are some real challenges to studying dolphin communication. And then we're going to explore, is it really possible to communicate with another species? And if so, why now are we trying to do it? And what can computers do for us to help us? Now, dolphins are great acousticians, of course. They're known for their acoustic abilities, but they also have great vision. They have both monocular and binocular vision. They have taste, which is a chemical sense, and they have touch. And they have cross-modal abilities between sound and vision. And sound can actually be felt, so it can function tactily as well. So even though we're going to be talking a lot about acoustics, it's like I'm up here waving my arms, there's a lot of other signals they use to complete the picture of dolphin communication. Now, I always like to use this cartoon to summarize the history of dolphin communication studies. First, they always happen in captivity historically. Scientists often focus on the acoustic channel because they're great acousticians. And believe it or not, scientists, at least some decades ago, were expecting the dolphins to speak English, which sounds silly now, but we've tried that with chimps and dolphins. We expect them, but they're not vocally able to mimic human words. Now, we use a visual representation of their sound, like we do for human communication.
At the Wild Dolphin Project. Hi, and I'm Michelle Green. I'm a graduate student here.
So that's what human sound looks like. You're looking at vertical as frequency or pitch, horizontal as time. And we use the same techniques when we're analyzing dolphin sounds to a certain extent. We run our video, and we watch the sound stream go by and pull out the sounds we're interested in. So this is a little aggressive sequence you're seeing with head-to-head behaviors and too low? You're fine. So we've always used these kinds of tools, but the difference is we don't have a Rosetta Stone yet for dolphin sounds. We don't know how to break them apart or categorize them. Now, we work in the Bahamas, so here's a map of, there's Florida, the East Coast. Across the Gulf Stream are the Bahamian Islands. They're submerged sandbanks. And in most other parts of the world, water is simply too murky, and you cannot observe underwater. That's why I chose the Bahamas to work in, so we can interpret underwater behavior. Our Wild Dolphin Project, our nonprofit, has a 60-foot power catamaran, so we go out for 4 to 5 months in the summer. We live aboard, we eat, sleep, work, research, have our computers out there, and we go where the dolphins are and just try to get time with them in the water. Now, the main tool I use, because we study underwater, is an underwater video that has an input of a hydrophone, which is an underwater microphone. And the animals are relatively habituated to us. It took about 5 years to do that, actually. And most of our work is non-invasive. We don't capture the animals, tag them. We try to just observe and decode. Now, the species we work with, Stenella frontalis, are Atlantic spotted dolphins, and they're really great to track because they get spots with age. So here's a little calf without spots, and the mother here is a fully actuated adult. We use ID techniques such as looking at dorsal fin marks to determine who's who, and because their spot patterns are unique, we also use spot patterns to track individuals. And this is critical to any work with a mammalian society because you have to be able to keep track of the individuals, know who they are, who they hang out with, their life history, reproduction, all that basic stuff. Now we also have the advantage that we can sex our dolphins so we know who males and females are. If you want a take-home message to impress your friends, I'll tell you how to sex a dolphin. On the left-hand side of the screen, there's a male on the top, female on the bottom. Females have little mammary slits, of course, because they nurse their young. Looks like a division sign, and the upper one looks more like an exclamation mark. So you run into a dolphin in a dark alley, you'll know how to sex them. It could be fun or dangerous. So we track individuals. On the upper right, you see a very pregnant female dolphin. So they're pregnant for about a year. They have calves every 3 to 4 years. So there's a lot of heavy investment parentally. So there's a lot of time to learn, practice, develop social skills. We're now on our 3rd generation. Again, so we're able to track these relationships and try to look at their behavior in this societal context as well. And the males have a unique relationship. They form very strong alliances that last a lifetime. And their job is to sort of protect the nursery groups and the young calves, chase away sharks, that sort of thing, and to mate with as many females as possible. Now, we do know something about dolphin sounds and communication. We know they use frequency modulated whistles. Hopefully this will play. And some of these are actually unique to individuals, so we call them signature whistles. They function essentially like names. They also use burst pulse sounds. And I know they sound like ducks, but they really are dolphins. And this is a close proximity sound. We usually see this in aggressive contexts. It's actually the most frequently used sound. Those are echolocation clicks, the dolphin sonar that they use to navigate and dig under the sand. And they also have buzzes, which are another kind of social sound, close proximity. And we think this has a tactile effect. They're often used when males are chasing females to court them, etc. So we have some basic categories of sound. And because we can observe underwater, we can correlate certain sound types with certain behaviors. on kind of a gross level, but we're still trying to figure out how complex their sounds are. Now, one of the big issues with any animal communication studies, especially acoustically, are their signals referential or are they graded? So referential signals are something that refer to something. They might label something, like a name, for example, as a reference or a word. A graded system usually is thought to show the motivation or emotional state of the animal. It's about intensities of sounds and numbers of sounds per second, that sort of thing. Dolphins seem to have both. We have both. But how many referential signals they have, do they have words for something? We have no idea if any animals do. There are other examples of referential signals in nature. We've known for quite a long time that vervet monkeys, for example, have different kinds of alarm calls for different predators. So essentially they can take the correct action if they hear their comrade calling a certain alarm call that there's a leopard coming versus an eagle from the sky. Some fantastic work, if you're really interested in this subject area, on prairie dog alarm calls. Some very advanced work done by Konz Slobodchikov, tracking how prairie dogs can create alarm calls that actually represent complex information, like there's a human walking through the field with a yellow shirt with a gun, or there's a human walking through the field with a red shirt and he doesn't have a gun. So we know animals are a lot more complex than we think, but figuring out what these sounds mean are very tricky. So you can imagine, it'd be pretty handy if you were a dolphin and you wanted to give an alarm call for a specific type of shark that was dangerous versus not dangerous. But we have yet to find that alarm call, usually because we're swimming backwards to get out of the water ourselves. So kind of hard data to get. Now, there are some really serious challenges still today, both in captivity and in the wild, understanding and decoding dolphin sounds. One is getting their high frequency sounds, and the second is localizing who's making the sound. So the diagram you see is basically how dolphins produce and receive sounds. And the big points about the diagram is that dolphins are very directional senders and they're very directional receivers. And so if you want to capture a full broadband dolphin signal in the water, you have to be on axis with your recording equipment, hopefully with enough recording power to sample high frequencies. Now, just to trick researchers, dolphins can internally point their sound about 20 degrees. So you could think you're on axis and actually the dolphin might be pointing about 20 degrees to the side. So it's a little hard. They also make two sounds at one time. So they can be making a whistle and a click at the same time. But even more difficult is localizing who's vocalizing. So when I talk about sound correlates with behavior, that's usually a group of animals. They're fighting. We've got a bunch of squawks and squeaks and all sorts of things. But what we don't have is dolphin A just made a sound, dolphin B responded, back and forth, et cetera. And you can get this kind of information if you have like a hydrophone array or a way to localize a sound using arrays. Again, hard to use in the water, but these are tools and techniques we try to use to get some information regarding individual sound and sound exchange between dolphins. Now, just to show you what the high frequency sound recordings can give us, you see the human audible range, that's about 15 kilohertz. Those are the whistles you heard. And the fuller screen is up to 110 kilohertz. So you can see some of the harmonics from the whistles. You can see places where the sounds go way up. This would be ultrasonic information. And you actually see places where you have no indication that there's any sound at all. So if you were only recording in the narrow band, lower frequencies, you wouldn't even know there's sound there. So again, this is their sensory world. We have to adapt, and we use technology to record these kinds of sounds. Now, we've done a pretty good job of measuring whistles and figuring out how to look at them and using computers to do this. We can just measure things like how long the sound is, what the frequency range is, how many loops there are. These are 4 signature whistles of dolphins, and you can tell just by looking at them how unique they are. You can separate them. We can also use neural nets to train the computer if we have enough samples of each individual, and we can see how the computer either separates them or doesn't, which gives us a quantitative measure actually of how similar or different whistles are. Now, whistles are the best studied sound, and sadly it's because they're just easier to measure. So we know a lot about whistles, but they are not the most frequently used sound, nor do they have a lot of broadband characteristics that might encode information that we're really interested in. Now, the way we really look at sounds and behavior is we try to look at in a multimodal array. We use a behavioral software called Observer that allows us to label body postures now that we're going to watch in the video. So we might go through our video and we'd label a head-to-head, little social activity, another head-to-head, courtship activity, etc. We put in our ethogram, which is just coding for different kinds of body postures in this case. We put that on a timeline. But because we want to see the interaction between sound and behavior and how that's all used together, we want to take another timeline, start coding sounds. So now we're pulling off our sounds off our spectrogram. Again, looking at, there's a scream, there's a whistle, here's some buzzing, and now there's a bunch of burst pulse sounds. Now, this is doable, but the problem is we might be able to label a type of a scream and a type of signature whistle, but when we get to these burst pulse sounds, it's pretty hard. So our main goals here, working with Thad's group, are number one, to try to categorize some of these more difficult sounds, to give us a way to get through our data and categorize them adequately so we can start making sense of the information. Of course, then we want to go back, match it with types of behaviors like aggression or play. And finally, once we get these categories and we can mine our data and look for longer sequences, we can start looking for structure and order. And this is something, again, as scientists, we really lacked these tools, at least in the animal communication field. You may have had them in human language disciplines, but this is something we have not applied to animals to see what kind of order structure they might have. And again, these are 3 spectrograms of some of the sounds. 2 are humans, and 1 are a bunch of dolphins squawking. And you can tell they kind of look similar. Maybe you can tell who's who, but basically, it's the middle one are dolphins. And they look a little like phonemes, not that they are, but they have similar structure. And they're simple. Hey, quiet there. They're tough to measure. And that is actually one of the reasons Thad and I started working together, because he has some great tools and techniques that he's going to share in some tech detail.
Excellent. So when we're trying to crack the code of dolphins, what we need to do is figure out if there's a fundamental unit they use for their vocalizations, and do they combine those units together in order to form new vocalizations. So what we have had at Georgia Tech for a while now is an algorithm that can take a large database of data and look for these fundamental units. We've done this before with handwriting recognition. We'll take cursive handwriting and we'll actually look at all that data, and we'll be able to pull out individual letters. When we do things like speech, like for example this lecture, we might get the individual words or phrases that are used repeatedly throughout the lecture. Matter of fact, we'll also get things like coughs and applauses, and if the mic is rubbing against the person's suit coat. All these things just get discovered by the algorithm. Now, this is very different than what we normally do with speech recognition or handwriting recognition, or my specialty is sign language recognition. So if we do sign language recognition, for example, we know that this is the sign for cat, and this is the sign for fish. What we really want, though, is to have a universal algorithm that can take anything with this sort of structure, discover the fundamental units, and then uncover the repeated patterns, the grammars, the rules to that behavior. And so this is one of the first things we did, is start looking at Denise's data. I think this is half of her data from 2012. And we got these 12 patterns we saw repeated throughout her data set. And we display them for Denise so she can say, hey, are these interesting? Of course, we don't really care about things like boat noise. We only care about things like burst pulse noise or whistles, and potentially the echolocation. And so we get these patterns, these fundamental patterns, these units, and we can then put them in a visualization tool for Denise. We take the features we discovered, show all the patterns we discovered, and then Denise can say, I'm not interested in this pattern, I am interested in this pattern, this example does not look like the rest, get rid of that. The system can be tuned to recognize those patterns more specifically. Right now, I should say all this is automatic. There's no human intervention done with this. And after we get these patterns, the system then labels the entire data set with those patterns. It color codes it with the patterns it's discovered. Now, what can we do with this? Well, the first thing we can do is see if there are structures to the patterns. For example, here's a structure we discovered. It turns out this pattern J and the pattern C repeat after each other. C follows J a lot, but not all the time. It seems to follow in this particular structure. And that's very exciting to us. Let's start saying, hey, hey, maybe there's something here, maybe there's something more we can look into. What really got us excited is we started finding rules. There seems to be a structure in this data set. There seems to be rules about what can be uttered when, which pattern can be used when in this data set. And so we can see that some things can be put here and other things can't. That's really exciting. Matter of fact, as we went forward, we discovered that the rules were better predictive of the visual behavior that we see from the dolphins than anything else. Not just the percentages of the patterns, not what you call normal grammars, but the rules. It indicates much more structure than we first thought. And that's to me as a data scientist, that's very exciting. Now we're starting to get to the stage where we can say, okay, Denise, we have all your years of annotation, and we did this for the second half of 2012. We looked to see everything she did visually. We looked to see, whenever she said, there's a particular dolphin like Bijou in the scene, or there's a particular dolphin named Rosebud in the scene. And then we could look to see if we could predict what those labels would be. So Denise would say there's something interesting here, and then we try to predict what she was going to label it as. Was she going to put down a dolphin ID there? Was she going to put down aggression, or foraging, or nursing? What label was she going to use? And it turned out that these rules, these combination of patterns, were very good at predicting things like which dolphin was around at that time. This has been a wonderful result 20 years ago. We basically rediscovered signature whistles. But what Denise told us to do is see if you can start using your acoustic data to predict these classes of biological data that we know are distinct. We know that aggression is different than foraging, which is different than reunions, when mother and calves are reuniting. Can we actually use our system and these rules to predict these different behaviors? So again, she's just labeled these behaviors visually. We're now trying to just use the acoustics to predict these labels. And what we discovered is that the rules involved with aggression do not correspond to the rules with play. Neither do the rules with play correspond to the rules with foraging. Now these are the rules of the patterns that are generated, right? So what this graph is showing you is how much aggression looks like aggression. If we look at one thing with aggression, every other things of aggression, how much does it look similar? So blue means things are very similar. Green means that things are very different. Yellow means that there's some correlation between the two. And as we can see here, the four behaviors that are biologically distinct really do come up as distinct in the acoustics. That's exciting. Now the question is, if we go beyond Denise's 2012 data, if we use all 30 years of her data and start clustering it together, can we actually pull out behaviors that she hasn't observed before? Things she might have seen but not realized were distinct. Can we actually say, hey, at this point, and this point, and this point, and this point in your video, something is happening that's acoustically distinct? If we get to that stage, then we're at this stage where our tool is helping her do new science. And that's why we're so excited. We're just now at the threshold of making a tool where we can actually start taking Denise's 30 years of data and allowing her to process it and make hypotheses and test those hypotheses in minutes and not years. One thing I should mention while we're at this is that this has happened before in biology. When genetics and genetic sequencing was first coming out, there's a tool in GeneBank which allowed the computer program to look at repeated patterns in different types of humans. You could say, okay, here's this repeated pattern and it only happens in Parkinson's patients. Here's this repeated pattern and it only happens with people who have blue eyes. Here's this pattern and it only happens with people with flat feet. And it kind of caused an exponential explosion in the number of papers written in the science in biology. That tool, which is actually on the line, you can actually go play with it yourself, and it was used here to teach these classes. This tool uses discrete base pairs, you know, TCG.
TCG.
Thank you, A. I was missing A. It uses those 4 base pairs and that sequence to predict when something's going to be interesting. We are trying to make the same thing except for things like speech and handwriting, and in this case, dolphin vocalizations. Things that aren't discrete, things that have a continuous time to them. So now we're really excited that we're finally at the stage where this tool is starting to show promise. I think yours is next, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, I also just wanted to mention, well, I've been waiting 30 years for this tool. And it's a good example of how important interdisciplinary work is. I mean, as biologists, we live in our little biology world, and we don't know you have these great tools in computer science sometimes. And to also mention that there are many data sets out there in my field, in marine mammalogy, in prairie dog work, that could use this same tool, it doesn't have to be dolphin vocalizations, to mine the data and really start looking at a lot of systems. So we're excited about applying that to other colleagues as well and their lovely data sets. So the second aspect we work on together between Wild Dolphin Project and Georgia Tech and Thad's group is the interface using an underwater wearable computer. So you might start out by asking, well, is it even possible to communicate with another species? Well, in the Bahamas, our Atlantic spotted dolphins that we work with already have a second species they interact with. These are bottlenose dolphins you can see here. They're about 3 feet larger than the spotted, so they have a little physical dominance, but they have a very complex and regular relationship. They already spend time together foraging sometimes. They babysit each other's calves across species, which is really interesting. They have a little bit of a dominance relationship, the males, between the 2 species. But they also help each other when there's an intruder, a big shark or something. They'll group together and fend off the intruder. And for example, some of my students are looking at are the postural communication signals different or the same when spotted dolphins are fighting each other versus when they're fighting bottlenose. So how much could these 2 species communicate even across those lines? Now, we can find other examples, many examples actually, of how other species tap in by either listening and decoding warning calls of other species, like birds and monkeys. And we have 2 good examples of how species create mutual signals to communicate with each other. For example, orcas, who have different dialects in the Pacific Northwest, have some mutual calls they use only when the groups are together, and when they separate, they use their own dialect. We have examples in Costa Rica of 2 species of dolphins that have their own sounds when they're by themselves, and when they get together with the other species, they have some mutual calls. So one of the strategies actually is to just create kind of a shared, simple kind of communication system. So that's kind of what we thought about doing with the dolphins. Now, is it really possible to communicate with another species? Well, just with time, we know that by observation and immersion, a species can learn a communication system, whether it's our human kids learning language or dogs, for example, that we've evolved with. We have examples of someone like Irene Pepperberg who grabbed an old technique called social rivalry and applied it to test parrots cognitively to see if they could learn and communicate. So the injection of a new technique can be critical if you want to communicate with another species. And finally, if we have species that can't mimic human words, like parrots can make words to a certain extent, but if you have chimpanzees or dolphins, we need a technological interface. How do you bridge that gap and give them a tool to communicate back? And this has really been the missing element, both in cognitive work and interspecies, potentially exploring that aspect. Now, in the Bahamas, for decades, we started noticing that the dolphins it seemed like they were trying to communicate in certain ways. They would do postural mimicries when we were in the water. Sometimes they would try to do little vocal mimicries, rhythmic mimics. And we thought, wow, okay, this is a very unique place. You couldn't do this a lot of places in the world. But because they have time to spend with us, they have a relationship with us, we thought, wouldn't it be cool to give them some kind of tool and let's see what they would do with it? We know in captivity that dolphins can learn to label words with sounds and use them to a certain extent. But what about wild animals? Would they be even motivated or interested in trying to interact? So we tried to bridge the gap with technology. Keyboards have been successful with various chimpanzee studies, giving the animals tools to communicate. And there was actually, there have been some keyboards developed over the decades. Probably the most Advanced one was in the late 90s. The IPaT Center in Orlando had built this underwater keyboard, the big yellow thing you see, that actually allowed the dolphin to use a keyboard with the diver to talk together and go over and do stuff together. It's not continuing anymore, and they had some interesting results. But so people have thought about creating these interfaces, but the technology has been a bit slow until now. So our original vision was, well, we have a research boat, maybe we could hook up a keyboard to a computer on the boat, drop the keyboard over the side, the dolphins would come and work at the keyboard with the diver, and we'd all be communicating. Well, they have pretty interesting lives without us, so we discovered pretty quickly they weren't going to hang around the boat and use a keyboard. I mean, they'll do that in a tank, but out in the wild. So we quickly designed a portable keyboard, and this was basically a piece of aluminum that had a little CD player in the box and a visual symbol, and the idea was that we could swim along with it when the dolphins wanted to interact. And the signals were artificial whistles we created that were outside their normal repertoire, so we didn't want to say the wrong thing to them. That's an example of the whistle. And it could be activated by the keyboard pusher or by a point by the dolphins. And we just thought we would see how they would use it, and we basically designed 4 whistles. We associated them with objects that the dolphins like to play with. Some are natural objects like sargassum, which is seaweed. Others were scarves and things like they like to drag around in the water. And of course, bow ride is a high motivation ticket. And so we labeled these objects with visual and acoustic cues. And the idea was the dolphins were able to mimic these whistles, and then as humans we could respond to their request. But the technology, it was very archaic, very slow, and we really decided we needed a more advanced tool that had quicker response time, and it was more dolphin friendly, basically. So again, Thad came in and said, oh, I build wearable computers. This will be easy. I'll build underwater wearable computers. And so we designed a system called CHAT, which stands for Cetacean Hearing and Telemetry. And now instead of the visual keyboard, we got rid of that. We decided, well, dolphins are just acoustic. Let's go acoustic. We'll be like dolphins. We'll hear sounds and play sounds, hopefully. So the system has a couple hydrophones that receive sounds, a speaker that plays sounds. The user has a keypad where we can generate the sounds. And the power of it is really in its real-time sound recognition. So if a dolphin mimics a sound, we know real-time what sound it's mimicked, and we can act appropriately, giving it the toy it likes to play with or whatever we've designed in the system. Now, 2 things that are really important in the system. It's not only the technology, but it's the technique. So we use the technique of modeling the communication system like Pepperbird did with her parrots. And the idea is that you can't just assume an animal is going to know what you want it to do to a certain extent. If you model the system, so as humans, we get in the water and we put our boxes on, and if we want the scarf from the other human, we use the box, we request the scarf, the other human gives it to us. So we practice that without the dolphins around. When they're around, we also use it to ask for things from our other human. And the idea is that if they want to get in the game, they're perfectly able if they mimic some sounds. Now, so the idea is 2 divers have a box. Diver A might put out a scarf whistle. So they play the scarf whistle. The diver hears it as a human word in a bone-conducting headphone in a male voice saying that it's going out. It's a male voice going out. Diver B would hear it as a female voice coming in, and the dolphin would hear it as the whistle itself. Or, alternatively, diver B puts out the whistle for sargassum. Diver A hears it as a word in their headphone. The dolphin, again, hears it as a whistle. And the idea is that the dolphin wants one of the toys. It can mimic the whistle. The divers would both hear it in a female voice saying, hey, somebody externally, not you, somebody externally has requested this toy. And the idea is that the dolphin gets the toy and the diver and plays with it, reinforces the idea of associating this word with the toy. Now, this is actually some underwater video of a session this summer. So there are 2 divers in the water with boxes. I've got the yellow scarf, and Bethany, the other diver, she's going to request it from me. She's pointing, which is a visual cue, and playing the sound. So we're just modeling this in front of the dolphins. They're paying attention to us. They're curious about it. There's a little dolphin whistle in there. I've just requested the scarf from Bethany using the system and the whistle. And now I'm going to dive down and offer it to the dolphins. I'll drop it, I'll play the whistle and associate it. And then if we're lucky, we get the scarf back and we can exchange it again. And it's actually this summer, a couple of times when I requested it from them, I played the sound, they would actually drop it. So we're still working through the data, but it's pretty interesting. And they're doing some little attempted mimics that are pretty intriguing. They'll try to match our frequency zones, and they haven't really triggered the system fully yet. But it's really a question of how far can you take this communication. So this is it's not a translator, it's just a very basic interface. But we know dolphins are great mimics. They're excellent vocal mimics. And they seem to be a little motivated to communicate with us because we're trying to make it fun and have toys they like to play with. And the idea is this system is designed to empower the dolphins, to give them a tool to communicate back in some detail. We've actually put some of their signature whistles in the system so I can address them as individuals when we see them. And we also created human signature whistles, so I have a Denise whistle. And I hope they use it to call me and say hi. So it's one of the things we thought they used in their natural system we could incorporate. So we could do a signature whistle exchange, because that's what they do when they greet each other. They make the whistle and the other dolphin makes the whistle. And hopefully with the new decoding software, and if we get a more sense of their natural sounds, we may reintegrate that in the two-way system so we could actually get a little more dolphin communication signals in the system. Now, the vision's great and the idea is great, but implementing the hardware and software has been a journey, starting with leaky boxes the first season. So Thad's going to go into that.
So when Denise and I first met, we discussed the idea of using my algorithms to find these fundamental units of vocalization with the dolphins, but she mentioned this side project, which was, let's create some box where I can have two divers in the water, and one has a rope or a scarf or something that dolphins like to play with. And the first diver can make the sound and request the rope from the second diver. And so they play the sound, the second diver hears it and then takes the rope and gives it to the first diver. And they can play this game in front of the dolphin repeatedly. And I was like, how hard can this be? My group has been making wearable computers for 25 years. We also run the rapid prototyping lab here on campus. Surely we can make a wearable computer that would handle this. Of course, I didn't take into account how badly computers handle salt water. We spent our first year figuring out how to deal with salt intrusions and all sorts of horrible things that happen to these computers. I thought it was going to take a semester to get a prototype to Denise. 4 years later, we finally have something stable. So I'm actually quite proud of it. One of the folks who's here today is Scott Gilliland. Actually, let me do this. So Scott can actually ask you some questions of it, but answer the questions about the hardware. But I want to give you a demo of the hardware right now. This is me spending some quality pool time with the equipment in the early iterations. And one of the things we have here is a speaker to talk with the dolphins, hydrophones, microphones, keyboard control it, and on my head is bone conducting headphones. Now how these work is it's actually a speaker that doesn't use the air, but instead it sends the vibrations through your skull to your cochlea. Right? It doesn't use your eardrum. This is extremely useful when you're in the water. Right? You can hear it very well. In air, it's not quite so well. So what I've done is I've hooked up our bone conducting headset to this microphone up here. So we are going to give you a quick tour. Let's see if I can do this. Of our systems. Now, the first thing I should mention is, whoops, excuse me, Denise, I will steal my hardware here. First thing I should mention is this thing.
An aluminum casserole dish.
Aluminum casserole dish, yes. This is made using one of the rapid prototyping labs on campus. It's milled from a solid block of aluminum. Just the aluminum cost us $400. That was the first shock. So it took us a while to figure out how exactly to mill a device like this, where we get exactly what we wanted in a size that actually could be fit on the human body. Now, the next surprise we had is exactly how expensive it was to get waterproof connectors. So after we mill the container, after we mill this thing, we actually have to put holes in it, which you can see here on the bottom. There we go. And we got to put these connectors on. Now each of these connectors cost us about $80 a piece. That's not fun either. And it turned out that, you see a connector that says it's waterproof. There's different levels of waterproof. We found that out the hard way. Some things like waterproof, like things for your lawn and garden, are IP67 waterproof. They handle splashing. They don't handle immersion very well. And so our first year, we spent some time figuring out that the connectors we had chose weren't really going to survive. As a matter of fact, the connectors we really wanted weren't in supply, so we had to wait for those to the next year to actually get them. These connectors are surprisingly hard to get sometimes. One of the next things we discovered is that some hydrophones are not waterproof. Let me say that again. We discovered that some hydrophones are not waterproof. One of the things that Scott has with him right now is some of this. You see this yellow cable on his box. The yellow cable there is the waterproof housing on top of wires that then go into the box. But one of the problems is that, as we're moving around, as we're interacting with the dolphins, as we're getting in and out of the boat, you get a nick in that waterproof housing, and suddenly the water forces its way the whole way through the wires and into the box, through the hydrophone cable. That was a rude surprise. So after many years of actually, many months of actually iterating on this, we finally got to the stage where we can make a waterproof case. And matter of fact, one of the things Scott was showing you is a recent test system. One of the things the Rapid Prototyping Lab just got is a 3D printer that, shockingly enough, can print waterproof cases. Oh my word! This is so exciting. We can now reproduce, each one of these things I said is like $400 just for the aluminum. Then there's all the worker time and the mill time. This is a very expensive machine to do. With the 3D printer, it's just like, what was it, $5 an ounce? Something like that?
33 cents a milliliter?
Yeah, so 33 cents a milliliter.
$5 a cubic foot.
So now, once we create the CAD files, we can just print out as many boxes as we want. Great. So we're currently in the process of trying to figure out whether or not these things are going to withstand the rigors of being out in the Atlantic Ocean. The last test we did was we strapped this box to the agitator in a washing machine and sent it through like 10 different wash cycles to see if they would leak. So far, we're actually pretty good, and the connectors last as well. So we think we finally got that working.
It's a very clean box.
It's a very clean box.
Hot and cold water.
Well, it actually matters in the Bahamas. Okay, so now let me flip this thing over to the back, so I can take you a little tour of the inside of our box. Oh, it's upside down. Let's try that. So one of the first things we had to do is find a computer that would have enough horsepower that we could actually process the Dolphin sounds in real time and still not have it overheat in this little small box. Now you might think that because it's an aluminum box, it'd be great for this. As it turns out, when you're baking in the Bahamas sun, that aluminum is not necessarily your friend. We can actually get these things very hot on the inside. So we need to have a low power, high throughput computer. One of the next things we had to do is make a 192 kilohertz sound system. The Dolphins communicate at a much higher frequency range than what we use. And so we couldn't use your standard off-the-shelf CD sound system that maxes out 44 kilohertz. We had to go something much higher. So currently we have a 2-channel, 192 kilohertz audio system in there. The next thing that we needed to worry about was the audio amplifier. So it turns out to make sound go through water takes a lot of power. So those big woofers that you see at rock concerts, you drop them into salt water, they don't last long. But not just because of the salt water, but because they don't actually have enough power to get to couple with the water to push this non-compressible media. So we actually started having to design our own speaker systems. We are now a speaker manufacturer. They're very expensive. And they work only for very few frequencies. But it does work. In fact, we've had to match our amplifier to that speaker. Our amplifiers are very custom as well. So basically, we're taking those big, huge amplifiers you have in your home stereo system, we're shrinking it down to about that big, and then we're powering it off of batteries. And because we have a marine mammologist on board who's doing long days, we gotta have enough battery power that the thing lasts all day. So,
And we thought it would be easy.
we thought it'd be easy. It'll just take a semester. Now you notice that also that this case is clear. It's not all aluminum. The reason for that is Wi-Fi signals do not get through a metal case. Guess how we figured that one out? So we want to have the ability to take the things out of the water and download the data quickly. Matter of fact, I got some great video of Denise treading water, holding the box over her head so we can send a patch over to the system over Wi-Fi in real time while she's out with the dolphins. That did not make me popular. But what we finally got is a system that we can actually get the data off pretty quickly. We can actually talk to it. We also have a screen on here so we know if it's working. Matter of fact, we know if it's connected to the Wi-Fi. We know how loaded it is. As a matter of fact, we're about ready to load it. We're going to do a little demo here. Now again, this is the bone conducting headset. This normally goes through your skull, and so we had to actually turn down the amplifier here so we can blow out your eardrums as we play this. So hopefully what we can do is play a sound. Now again, what happens here is I'm going to push a button to play one of the sounds for rope or scarf or seaweed. And when the system will announce what it's going to play in English before it plays that whistle. So here we go. Hey, start up. Or don't.
Stall for time and I'll reboot it.
Okay, I'll stall for time, you reboot it.
It wants to be in the water.
Apparently. Really?
What the heck?
It says it's on. Did I not start it up properly? Check the cable. Okay.
Yeah, that's when it does.
It got a leak again.
I should mention when they were trying to figure out the battery that they were very concerned that they were going to blow me up.
No, just catch you on fire.
Okay, well, you know.
Well, the problem is you have this shaped aluminum case with a plastic back against her chest, and the battery starts flaming out. It's a bad situation.
Ed.
So,
Not to mention, we didn't want to drown you either.
That's
That's
good
true.
too.
the other good one we were worried about is whether or not the electrical currents inside the box was going to attract the sharks.
Right.
Matter of fact, I had a pretty good one. I have some of the world's leading marine mammal vocalization experts hanging off the rope on the back of Stenella, right, testing my system for me. And the first mate, who's up on the looking out to see if there's any sharks, yells "shark" and dives into the water. I'm like, if I saw a shark, my first response would not be to dive in the water. So all I'm thinking is he's going out to investigate what type of shark it is. All I can think of is I'm about ready to lose a good fraction of the marine mammologist vocalization specialists in the world. Fortunately, it was a nurse shark. He could scare it away, and we kept on going about it. But you could see everybody was kind of nervous as they're hanging off the line as shark bait with these big electrical boxes on them. Okay.
We think we're good.
We think we're good. Great. So now what we're going to do is play one of the whistles. And you can hear that was done in a male voice. It says scarf in a male voice, so we can distinguish it from when we actually recognize one of these things. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to pray this works.
Switch your display over to.
I don't need to.
Display.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do, I guess I could do that. Here, we'll do one and the other. Maybe not. Oh, never mind. We're not going to worry about that. We're going to just play it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play one of the whistles, and hopefully it's going to pick it up over the speaker system and listen and recognize it. Now, this system is tuned for water, not for air, so I'm crossing my fingers here. Oh.
It worked earlier.
Let's try one more time. Oh, you know what I can do? Is I can turn up our volume.
Yeah. Did you?
Oh, it did?
Those of us who can still hear that.
Unfortunately, the box didn't recognize it.
That's a computer.
There we go. So you heard the female voice there. I finally got the volume high enough. The thing is we can't hear ourselves as well up here as you can out there. So I had to turn up the volume high enough so the box can actually hear it. Now again, the audio actually couples better when you're in the water with the appropriate speaker. So we've gotten to the stage where this thing is, what, 97% accurate or something in picking up the right whistle when we play it. Okay, so now going back to where I was. So this is a picture from our first year. We had a lot of trouble with actually things leaking on us. And you can see we started with a keyboard there that was strapped to the arm. And this kind of shows that how you have to iterate in making these sorts of devices. We thought that Denise would really want the keyboard on her arm to control the box. As it turned out, what we really needed was a keyboard on the box itself. Now, making a waterproof keyboard is non-trivial. We looked at what professionals do, and they make these keyboards that are filled with mineral oil on the inside to help even the pressure and make sure that we don't get water intrusion. So that was where we started. We realized that this was expensive to make, and they're very big and bulky and heavy. So one of the things Scott did is start casting stuff in resin. He not only put the buttons in resin, but also put a display so we could see what's going on. As a matter of fact, afterwards, if you take a look at our system, you can actually see the last command we gave the system on this little screen. This is what we're currently using. We just got a paper out of this, in fact, where we're describing how to make these keyboards for other people. Now, one of the problems we've been having with our system is that the Dolphins have made vocalizations that sound like they're trying to mimic us. We do have some things that look very similar to that audio I just played, the scarf audio. The problem is they're doing it at higher frequencies than we expected. Unfortunately, our system is tuned only to recognize a certain set of frequencies. It is not powerful enough to recognize the full 96 kilohertz band that we can sample at. So we need a faster computer, but we can't have it burn itself up in the container. So now what we've started looking at is these small embeddable devices that have high-end graphics cards in them. Thank goodness for the gamers. They are giving us the processors we need to do really fast audio processing. And so we're taking this NVIDIA Jetson board, and notice that it's got a big fan on it to cool it off. But unfortunately, there's no free-flowing air in the container, because otherwise it'd be free-flowing water, and that wouldn't work very well. So instead, we're putting big heat sinks on this thing and coupling it to the box itself. And if you come to the open house tomorrow, you'll see this thing lying around. We're currently desperately trying to get this thing running for a demo tomorrow, where I hope we'll have for the first time a spectrogram running at a whole 192 kilohertz in real time on this box to kind of show we can actually do the amount of processing we need to do to listen for the Dolphins to mimic these audio things at higher ranges of frequencies. At least that's our hope. One of the other things I should mention is notice the 256 gigabyte SSD drive here. We're starting to sample at 192 kilohertz at 16 bits, or I guess we're at 32 bits per sample, times 2 channels. We eat this drive like you would not believe. And so we have to actually make ourselves a relatively high-end system in a little tiny box. Now that's one of the first examples of where we're going next. We want to give Denise the power to do analysis of what the Dolphins are vocalizing in real time. What I'd love to be able to give her is, after we have the analysis of these fundamental units of the Dolphin vocalization done, I'd love to be able to recognize those units in real time and give her a head-up display, much like the Google Glass except waterproof, so that she can actually see sort of a script. We're going to represent each of the fundamental units in like A, B, C, D. She can actually see the script going across, and then I can manipulate it and repeat it back to the Dolphins. Right? That's the goal of this system, but we need a really high-end computer to do it. So that's one of our first future projects, and that's on the way right now. One of the other future projects is our Dolphin sub. One of the things we've discovered in our work with canines, yes, I also make wearable computers for dogs. One of the things we discovered for canines is that if you don't reward them right away, they can't be trained. So friends of ours at NC State have made a robot that actually trains a dog. But if the robot does not reward the dog within 50 milliseconds, that's like 1/20th of a second, the dog will not learn. So my question is, perhaps the amount of time it takes us to pass the scarf back and forth, or to pass the scarf to the dolphin, maybe they're losing interest, maybe they're not associating it with it as much. Maybe if we were faster on the draw, it would work better. Or better yet, if we gave the dolphins a toy that reacted to their vocalizations, maybe they'd have more fun with it. So here's a sub that's going to have the same sort of hardware in it, hopefully in the not too distant future. And then we're going to have our chat boxes so that we can play a sound like, and the thing flashes some lights. Might actually make it turn left, might make it turn right. If we do this, if we start playing with our remote control sub, our acoustically controlled sub, in the water, maybe the dolphins will get the idea and start joining in. This started as an undergraduate project in one of my classes. We're continuing it on right now. The sub is in pieces as we continue to work on it. You'll see that tomorrow as well, I hope. One of the other things we're starting to do is get into Denise's visual data. So the dolphins have unique spots, as Denise said. But what she didn't tell us is how unique they are. It turns out these dolphins are barcoded. We can recognize these dolphins from a good ways away just by their spots. I mean, this is surprisingly easy. Not only can we recognize them by giving a huge thing of spots, but it turns out almost every spot is unique. It's shockingly good. We've now made a system that if you have an adult dolphin in the scene, 95% of the time it will recognize that dolphin. It also never makes mistakes. It never says dolphin A is like dolphin D. It never says that bijou is rosebud or rosebud is bijou. The only time it fails is when it can't see the spots well enough, and then it makes no distinction. It says nothing. So now we finally have a tool that we can actually give Denise something where she can go through her 30 years of data and automatically know who's there. What's great is we have enough data from Denise that we're getting the dolphins from all sides. Now we can recognize the dolphins even when they're giving us a tail-on view. Interestingly enough, we can start doing this for other species as well. This is Stefano Fenu's work over at my lab. He's going to be doing demos of this tomorrow. One of our people on the dolphin boat, on the Stenella, is Adam Pack. Adam Pack has 20 years of humpback fluke tail data, which he's been manually trying to match. I shouldn't say he has 20 years. How many years does he have?
Over 20.
Over 20. Well, I mean, he's like got 30
yeah.
years.
Yeah,
but he's got a 20-year backlog because he's been trying to identify these flukes by hand. He's got 30,000 images that he's trying to match up. And so what Stefano did is use the same sort of tricks we did with the dolphin spots. And now, as of last week, we have 800 ones to start with. It looks like that what we can take care of Adam's backlog, Adam's 20 years worth of backlog, in about 2 weeks worth of work. Again, we're trying to make power tools for the marine mammalogists to get their work done. And this is really exciting because he can start using this to figure out where the humpback whales migrate. Do we see the same individual again and again? Which males associate with which females? How long do they hang out with the calves? These sorts of questions. Should finally mention again the acoustic stuff. Just like with the genetic work, we're hoping that we make this tool for Denise and suddenly it can be applied to other species as well. This is Slobodchikov's work on the prairie dog. And he's showing different types of alert calls. Now these are only 20 millisecond alert calls. Right? These things are very short. Excuse me, this is 200 millisecond alert calls. And in here it's describing a red-tailed hawk versus a human versus a coyote versus a domestic dog. This is 20 years worth of work for him to figure this out. And it's very well documented, very well done. Can we take large amounts of data from these animal vocalization specialists and take their 20 years worth of analysis and bring it down to 20 minutes worth of hypothesis testing. That is what would really be considered a success for me in getting this tool out the door. So with that, whoops, I was supposed to have one last slide. For those of you who are Georgia Tech students, if you're undergrads, we love freshmen because we can teach you what we want you to know. A lot of times we can get you to go on to be master's and PhD students, which means I get 12 years out of you instead of 4. I was one of those. So if you have an inkling to do, underwater electronics, we'd like to talk to you. If you're doing pattern recognition and are interested in one of these projects, we'd like to talk to you as well. There's a lot of ways to get involved in the project as a Georgia Tech student, either for pay or for credit. One of the other things that we are starting now is the Chat Society. So this is a way for y'all to get involved earlier on when we're actually talking about the technical details of what we're about to do and what we're doing and the scientific results before we publish them. And it's also a way to start supporting some of these student projects I talked about. It's one of the ways that we actually are trying to get ourselves bootstrapped to this next round of exciting research. And with that, I should ask whether or not you have any questions. And Drew, if you could run the mic around so everybody can hear the questions. And thank you very much. Questions?
Raise your hand.
We got one there, one there.
Back there.
Sure.
I was wondering, is there a reason why you don't attempt putting sensors on the dolphins to record their audio? Like, do you not want to intrude on their environments, or I guess what's the motivation behind that?
There are actually called D tags, data tags. People are starting to do that. In our particular situation, we feel if we would grab them and drill a hole through their fin and put a tag on them, we probably would never see underwater behavior again. So we choose to just observe and be non-invasive. But that is actually a technique that's coming about. There are researchers that might tag a couple pilot whales in a pod and they can get that exchange. Yeah, it's certainly a tool, probably not for us if we want to continue the work. But yeah, very good question.
We got over here.
It's related to how you identify dolphins with those spots. I mean, isn't that with all the animals? Like, for example, tigers are identified with their stripes, or maybe other animals. So, did it? You already had a hypothesis that dolphins can be identified using spots, or you found out?
Well, Denise can identify certain dolphins by their spots. One of the problems, though, is that juvenile dolphins don't have spots yet. It progresses over time, and so as you get older, you get more spots. So we got to make a system that not only identifies the current spots, but is tolerant of future spots as well. And what would be really great is if we actually could find something, some image processing techniques, which we're starting to work on, where we can see the latent spots, the spots that are just starting to come out in the juveniles, and start doing the identification there, or start looking at the variations of the tonal colors and do that as well. But yeah, Denise, when Denise showed us this and said that she could identify some of the dolphins by their spots, I was like, this is a nice little project, and it turned out Caitlin just did this as a class project, and it worked beautifully. Hopefully, we're going to get this published this year.
A perfect application of that actually is, even though we can identify a lot of them in real time in water, so we know who we're working with, sometimes we might have a group of 60 or 70 dolphins together and we're like, oh my gosh, who's here? But even more important, my graduate students go back through 20 years of video data and try to do a project on mothering style or aggressive behavior, whatever. They're looking at old video, and it's all logged. There's a narrative, this is so-and-so, but sometimes it's not so easy to ID them. And to have this automated program would save them vast amounts of time. They could say, oh, that's so-and-so fighting so-and-so, and verify it through spot patterns. So it has a lot of data mining applications as well.
One of the things I guess I should mention is that whenever you go back and try to annotate this data, it takes about 10 times longer than real time. Right. So every hour of data takes 10 hours of staring at. And oftentimes, what I find is that human reviewers tend to make mistakes 10% of the time. So that means you need to have multiple reviewers look at it and annotate it. So the gold standard is having at least 3 people annotate the same data, then compare all the results and fight it out among them who is right. And then once you have that coalesced, that is your ground truth. Interrelated reliability for some of these things, a good interrelated reliability is 80%. We try to get up to 90% for some of the stuff we do. It's just incredible amounts of time that we have to spend to actually go back and annotate the data. And so trying to make a tool that's automatic and can speed this up, can get us to real time, that would be incredible lifesaver for these people.
Yeah, Thad, if I could be in the water and I'd have a little name pop up.
I think
Bijou and Meridian are here. Yay!
I was actually working on that earlier.
Yeah,
I think
that
we
would
can do
actually
it.
be a good application.
I think we could do it.
Put in them instead of the spectrogram.
Well, putting in the mask is actually harder. I think I can put it in your camera case, but
I just want it all.
So Denise, from what I understand, dolphin brains have been evolving for about 50 million years.
Right.
Ours about 10 million? That
Yeah, depending on who you speak to, but
Okay.
right.
So we don't know that much about them. We haven't been studying them that long in human history, right?
Right.
First brain dissection was maybe late 50s or something.
Right.
And but they've seen us for a while. They're interested in humans, but they've seen us, at some of our worst,
Right.
right? They've seen wars at sea. They've seen nuclear weapons blown up at sea. They've been captured. They've been slaughtered. Do you think sometimes maybe they don't want to communicate with us?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't think you should jump in the water anywhere and try to communicate with dolphins. Yeah, they have interesting, busy lives, but they're intelligent. And I think a lot of species, if we weren't hunting them or chasing them or grabbing them, they might kind of stop. And you might be surprised what they'll do. In fact, you can see that in a marine park. People tell me that all the time. You can play with lobsters and grouper because it's a marine park. They get it. They see they're not going to be harmed. So your relationship takes on a different status. Suddenly you might be interesting to interact with. How far it can go, I don't know.
So are wild dolphins, are there similar dolphins coming and interacting with you, or are you running into different animals, or how's that work?
This is a resident group that I've grown up with. I know their grandmothers and the grandkids, so I know them pretty well individually. We haven't tried it with a new group. That is actually one of the potential tests of this system is could you go into an unknown group of animals who you didn't have a relationship with, and what would they do? I mean, these animals work with us because they know us, they're comfortable with us, they're safe, they know we aren't going to grab them or chase them or whatever. So, but it's about relationship. It's about being motivated to communicate with someone because you're interested. But, I think intelligence seeks intelligence. And I think when you have a species extending out, what could you do with it to be interesting? A perfect example also is the work that's also going on in Thad's lab with the dogs. Yeah. The missing tool for all this has been to give a tool to the animals to communicate back. And then we'll find out. But we test comprehension, we give them commands, etc. But what could they communicate in detail? So the Fido work's incredible. We got a demo today with my board of directors who's here. And they have a lot to communictate too. Some of it has practical applications.
I'm really surprised at how much the dogs can discriminate and how much they can communicate.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people have done stuff on dog intelligence or primate intelligence and try to do a cognition study, but very few people have actually tried to make an interface for the animal.
Right.
We talk about human-centered design and HCI and trying to make better touch screens for us on our iPhones and our Android phones. Well, how about for a dolphin? How does that work for a dolphin? How does that work for a dog? Anyways, I'm sorry.
To answer this gentleman's question about do the dolphins want to communicate with us, I have been very fortunate to have been involved with Denise since the late 90s. And the first trip I made with her out on the Bahama bank, I got in the water and a mother with a brand new calf came up to Denise and literally presented this calf to Denise. Instead of hiding her from these nasty humans, the mother presents this calf to Denise like, look what I did while you were gone over the winter. It was the first trip of the season, and I saw that happening, and I said, I want to become involved with this. To have that trust by wild animals in the field Denise had been out there already, what, 20 years? No, 15 years. And I said, this I want to be part of, because anytime you can see a wild animal show that trust in a human being is unbelievably exceptional and rare, and Denise had it. This mother showed this brand new calf and proud of it and wanted her to see what she had done. So, hello, Denise.
We know what they'll say.
Yeah,
I wanted
that
to make,
is not, Denise's motto has been in their world, on their terms, and non-invasive, not harming them in any way, and it has proven to be very fruitful.
I did want to just make a comment about giving animals tools to communicate. Back when Roger Fouts was doing his sign work with chimpanzees, he finally got them to sound, and they were in a cage, and their first sentence was, "Let me out." So you might be surprised what animals might tell us if we gave them a chance.
We'll do one more question, then we'll take a break for anybody who wants to go. Denise and I will hang out for a little bit. I used the hardware, but we'll end the formal thing because I know people have, it's late, people need to get somewhere. So one more question.
So you mentioned they were residents, and in the Pacific Northwest, the researchers have been able to use the community to track the orcas and find out their migration patterns and who associates with who. To what extent have you tried to do that or been successful doing that with locals in the Bahamas?
Well, most of our work's about 40 miles offshore. So we're kind of a boat floating out there in the middle of the ocean. Now, the sandbank's really shallow, so you can be 40 miles away and in 20 feet. There are dive boats we communicate with and work together to a certain amount. There are a few local Bahamian operators sometimes, and they'll send us pictures or et cetera. But it's a big area. It's like 480 square kilometers.
I guess in that sense, the Puget Sound is a lot easier.
Oh, yeah, they're near islands, yeah.
All right, I should mention that tomorrow is the Wearable Computing Center Forum from 8:30 to 1:30, if I remember correctly. And that's like a $50 fee to it, but it's one of the few times you get a chance to see a lot of the wearable computing people together, a lot of businesses looking at how to use wearables in the future. And also then there's the open house from 2 to 5 in 85 Fifth Street, the second and third floors is above Moe's. That's open for folks to come and see the research, not just ours research, but many professors showing off what they're doing. It's a good chance for the grad students to get practice in doing their demos, doing their sales pitches, doing the elevator pitches. So please come and hang out, see the cool research, and stop by my lab and see the stuff we're doing with the dogs as well. Thank you very much, folks.
Great, thank you.